Hey, thanks so much for tuning in to Around the World in 80 Oysters, a live show about global oyster cuisine, culture, and appreciation. I'm Julie Chu. I'm the founder of In a Half Shell, your guide to the world's best oysters and the most interesting oyster people. So today we're going to visit Singapore around the world for me, based in New York. And my special guest is Chef Polo Seah, who is the group executive chef of the Jigger and Pony Group, which includes seafood restaurant Humpback, a really popular place. So I'm going to bring him on. Hey, Chef.
Yeah. Hello, hi Julie.
Good
Morning.
morning. How are
Good
you?
morning. Yeah, evening to you. Good. Thanks.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for spending your morning with us. You are currently in Singapore. At home, I presume.
At home. Yeah, was on course today. Nowhere to go. Yeah.
Fantastic. So, I also wanted to give a quick shout out to my friend Sabrina for the introduction to
Yeah.
Humpback and your team. It's pretty cool to see like oyster connections being made around the world, like through this project, just meeting new people, and I'm so glad that you're
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
And
It's
for
an honor to be on the stage now.
Awesome. And for the people who are joining in, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments section. We will definitely try and answer them at the end. If not, if we can't get to them for some reason, we'll try and answer them later on the comments. So cool. So let's see. I think we should just start at the beginning. Like, can you tell me a little bit more about yourself and how how you got to Humpback? What's the story behind Humpback?
Well, I mean, like the Humpback story was actually is happened to be a honeymoon trip of my bosses.
Ooh.
And then they went is my lady boss who doesn't really love the oysters, and they came back after the honeymoon trip. They told me like, hey Polo, we should opening up a oyster bar.
You're like, what?
Yeah, like nowhere like oyster bar. So what can we do like so much different than other oysters bar? So they were telling me a story about like Hama Hama Farm is so fresh. Never tasted the flavor like that before.
So
This
they
is
were
my
honeymooning in Seattle.
in the Seattle.
Ah,
So
okay.
they were like happen to know a bartender friend who recommend them like, guys, you should check out this oyster farm.
Oh, I see.
So it was actually caught their attention, and they drove all the way from the Seattle to the Hama Hama Oyster Saloon. So
Yeah.
they came back and proposed to me. So my thought was like, well, I used to came from a seafood background,
Hmm.
where, wow, should I do it again? And I'm not really sure about the oysters, cause like, you know, so they start to educate me like the oysters story. So then, after a few months later, we booked a trip, and we flew from Singapore all the way to the Hamama farm.
Whoa. Yeah.
Wow.
Long trip.
So yeah, so like we cause of the research trip where we have to force to eat like you know a dozen a day or maybe even more for
Yep.
each of us, at least get to know the flavor of the oysters.
Yeah.
And especially like during the farm trip where like get to know Adam, James, the farmers,
Yep.
Lisa, Justin. So like during a half day trip in the farm with the Adam James, where we get to I mean he educate us, he teach us like where how to differentiate what is a good oysters and what are the flavor profile and things like that.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
That is cool. So that trip happened. When did that trip take place?
That was actually like I would say 6 years ago.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah, 6 years ago.
And then Humpback started.
5 years ago.
Okay.
So the research was actually take us about like 8 to 9 months before we opening up the Humpback here in
Right.
Singapore.
I want to show everybody with the map where we're going, where you guys are.
Yeah,
All the way on the other
yeah,
side, which is kind of
yeah.
crazy.
If we were to take flight, I would say like pretty much like 20 22 from the flight and plus a 2 hour
Ooh.
drive from the Seattle to the farm.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that is a long way. But here you guys are,
Yes, there
right
was
here.
a Humpback. Yeah.
Very cool. So I still
Yeah.
haven't visited Singapore. I really want to come.
You
Um,
should. The food scene here, I would say, is pretty vibrant.
yeah.
Yeah, where you can get a very cheap meal at the hawker or the food court, where you can get 1,000 meal at a very high end restaurant.
For sure. Like, what was the oyster scene like in Singapore before you guys came?
Oyster scene, I would say the the oysters level are not that crazy as a seafood. Where I guess
Mm,
like when you talk about seafood culture here in Singapore, everybody know that wow, chili crab. That was my first impression,
right.
right? So that was actually I would say like 40s. Like people know a seafood was a chili crab here in Singapore, but I would
Yeah.
say like slowly, like especially a millennials group where they start to appreciate more of a premium oysters here in Singapore.
Yeah.
And I would say oysters in one day it will overtake the seafood in the
Really?
world. I would
You
say
think
so.
so?
Because based on the demographic that we are getting,
Hmm.
a lot of it was actually millennials group.
Interesting. So you
Yeah.
see them when these millennials are coming into your restaurant. How many oysters are they typically ordering?
I mean, the demographic here at Humpback is pretty broad. Like, obviously, you will get millennials group, those who appreciate oysters, and those who know the oysters a lot.
Hmm.
And averaging for per person, I would say about a dozen to 15 pieces.
Okay.
Yeah, but what that was a crazy story. The
What?
record here, a person was actually 100 pieces. You will never believe it.
What?
Yeah,
In one sitting?
there was a huge guy,
Oh boy.
and that was for a man, and the lady's record was actually 52 pieces. That
Yeah.
was really blew my mind. Like, are you sure? Like, we are starting halfway through. That was actually reaches the 50 pieces,
Yeah.
and I was actually worried about him. Like, I went up to him, I talked to him. Are you sure you want to carry on? And
Right.
yeah, he was saying like he was pretty fine, and eventually he ate 100 pieces.
So this is someone who's from Singapore, not
Boom.
like an expat. Wow.
Singapore.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wait, so that kind of blows my mind. And just
yeah.
it wasn't like they've had oysters before, right? It wasn't like I just came in and I decided that I'm going to try 100 for the first time.
I wasn't really sure whether was it intention for him for the day, but I mean he just that like no rush by himself, like taking his own time,
Yeah.
a cocktail and oysters, a wine and oysters, and slowly add up to 100 pieces.
Oh my
And he
gosh.
seemed really comfortable with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Amazing.
otherwise like averaging about like 12 to 15 pieces.
Okay. Okay.
And yeah, and you know what, like here at Humpback, like since we actually naming the Hama Hama oysters after the farm instead of country,
I see.
where people appreciate more oysters at Humpback, or I would say Singapore.
So most other restaurants in Singapore, they're just, if you see oysters on the menu, they're just having like the
Yeah,
country and then but you're
exactly.
calling out the farm name.
Yes.
Ah, okay.
And with after the flowing by the farm of the oysters, then we will have a very small column where we have a description where the
Okay.
Hamama farm tasted clean with a cucumbery, where blue pools oysters are a note of the carrots, things
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now I know you have a special relationship with Hama Hama. Do you have like a similar relationship with any other farms in the world?
Not at the moment. I would
Yeah.
say like here at Humpback, we are mainly focused on the northwest oysters. Yeah, particularly Hama Hama. And just so that we know the product really well,
Mm,
and we have they Adam James like help me to source the top four for the day or for the week, and we know them, we know the product really well, and we can really assure that the product is pretty fresh
sure.
for all our consumer.
Is that important to people to know that the seafood is safe?
I would say like when we first opened, it's kind of like a little bit challenge to us, like where people are so get used to French oysters
I see. Mm,
or like some other particular oysters. Where we first introduced the Hamama oysters to the diners here in Singapore, where they are saying, can you guys order French oyster for me, Australia oysters to me? But well, like time proved everything. I would say like we since then we slowly introduced Hamama oysters, and where we start educate all our diners. You know, Hamama oysters is very exclusive to us. The
mm,
flavor are pretty different, so clean, so cucumbery, and slowly like the business pick up,
yeah,
and there are some also demographic people there where they are come back just particularly for the Hama Hama, Blue Pool, Sea Cow,
right.
etc. Yeah,
All of them. Actually,
yeah,
it's really
okay.
funny. I just got a delivery from Hama Hama. This is not a
Oh,
Hama Hama ad, sorry guys, but shameless plug. I got a box
oh,
today, and
pretty
Justin
cool,
sent me four different kinds.
pretty cool, pretty cool.
Yeah, I'm very excited to dig into them.
Nice. We really can't wait to bring them back in house.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I just showed a picture on the screen here of one of the ones that you sent, which looks amazing. So there's other dishes around. Do you guys do cooked oysters? Are cooked oysters popular? Either at your restaurant
Um,
or like as street food? Do you see them?
I, I would not say the cooked oysters are pretty popular here at Humpback or rather Singapore.
Okay.
Like those who came in, I would say pretty much 95% are all eating raw, and
Mm,
those 5% I would say like it could be due to a special dietary like pregnant or etc. things like that.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, but they do want a specific oysters. Like
Right.
of course we are having a four selection of the day. They would want like, for example, they want like just a blue pool to be cooked, or a sea cow to be cooked, or
Mm,
hama hama to be cooked, things like that.
right. Now,
But
have you brought other countries like so you guys focus exclusively right now on American Pacific Northwest
yes,
oysters.
yes.
Do you have plans to expand to bring in
um
other varieties, or is because it sounds like there's demand, but I'm not sure if.
okay, for us actually for the first years of the Humpback launch, where like the Hamama oysters period was actually from the September to the April. So
Yeah.
what happened was actually during the May till the August, where we actually get our local distributor to source the New Zealand or Canadian oysters
Mm,
for us during that summertime in uh, Hamahama farm.
yeah, that makes
So I
sense.
would say, based on the variety, we do particularly Hama Hama, and followed by Canadian oysters,
What kind of Canadian
uh,
oysters?
Fanny Bay,
Okay.
Sunseeker,
Yeah.
and we do a little bit of the New Zealand oysters where Coromandel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very
So I
nice.
mean, and subsequently, like 2 3 years later, like happened to be Adam James could source more summertime oysters for while Hama Hama and Blue Bulls are away.
Right.
Yeah, which
Well,
is pretty cool.
in the summer was so when so I know that you guys also threw a we said like an oyster festival,
Yeah.
right? These are the photos from there. Tell me
Yeah.
more about that. Like what inspired you guys to do that? Is that the first ever oyster
Uh,
festival in Singapore?
okay. So for us, right, it's more of to educational tour. Like, ever since we bought up Oyster Bar in Humpback, where a lot of the customer really want to sit just right by the oyster counter.
Yeah.
Where what I see from there is actually there are a lot of the question, you know. Like, so then during our anniversary, we actually decided to do the Oysters Festival,
Okay.
where there are a booth outside where to teach people how to shark from the hinge and how to see whether they are a beach grown oysters, they are a tumbler oysters.
I see.
And like true enough, like a lot of the people will actually sign up for the anniversary event and they came to a counter where they asked so much of the question or the topic. It was really, really fun.
Very cool. Are you gonna do it again?
Well, I guess like I have to really like leave it to the marketing team, like how to come up with a plan.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but for sure we will do like every single year.
Very cool. So tell me more about like I guess are there any oysters that are being farmed locally in Singapore?
Not really particularly, but actually I do find out there are a farm here in Singapore, which is another island like far east of Singapore,
Okay.
Pulau Ubin. The company called Sea Farmers, where what I understand is actually they get the baby oysters from the Australia and they farm it here in Singapore.
Okay.
Yeah,
And
I
they sell
mean
it into the local market.
they sell it in the local market and some of the restaurants,
Yeah.
and mostly the Pacific oysters.
Okay. Yeah. Are
Yeah.
there is there any like native oysters that you see the people harvest around, or does that just not exist?
There are some though, like we've been also offered by the Adam James was saying like there are some native voices. Are you guys keen? So it's just like we are not focusing so much on the native voices.
Mm-hmm.
So we did not brought it on. But yeah, you are right though. Like there are some couple of restaurants who just mainly on the East Coast oysters, native
Mm-hmm.
oysters. Yeah,
Right. Well,
yeah.
if you I know you've been to the farm. Do you find that what is the most interesting thing about the production side that you find the most interesting, and then that you tell your customers and they find interesting? Is there anything in particular?
I would say like if because I never ever been to oyster farm and I don't know I couldn't really imagine what was the farm look like, especially for the oyster farm.
Right.
And like my first experience was like, wow, this is an oyster farm. Like the moment that I stepping down to the beaches and they were saying like you are literally stepping on the Hamama oysters. Wow, then my first impression was wow, this is the Hamama oysters.
Yeah.
So you just during a half day trip with the Adam James where like he was share a lot of the story like how the oysters farm, how the oysters grow, and obviously like come back to the here in Singapore Humpback restaurant
Hmm.
where what I learned about what are the flavor of the hama hama and buku and what are the growing method and how long does it take and what are the process. So
Mm.
what I have absorbed for the from the trip where I educate to the audience, to the diners.
Yeah.
That's 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 where I think caught their interest. Where wow, you guys are not serving an product just by putting a product to your counter. It's
Yeah.
just we are selling the story.
Yeah. That's true.
Yeah, yeah.
Awesome. Well, that is very cool. I feel like there's so much opportunity to have that, same experience in other farms.
Yeah, I
Like
mean,
love Hama. There's so many other places, but it's also pretty. I mean, I guess it is a little bit challenging to ship the oysters all the way to Singapore from some of these places, right?
yeah,
That can't be cheap.
yeah. I mean, obviously not to share the cost here, but yeah, it's never be that cheap.
Yeah.
But it's good to have a really really exclusive product here at Southeast Asia at Humpback particularly.
Are people so people are pretty happy and understanding of the cost, right? Do they you mentioned that in Singapore you can find like very affordable street food to very high end. How do people perceive oysters in that value scale? Do they believe that it's always expensive, or do they feel like it should be less expensive?
I would say generally the oysters product here in Singapore are pretty expensive.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
it's
people
just
are okay with it.
people are okay with it. It's just that I don't think they will. It will be like a fine dining. It will be pretty much like upscale dining as
Mhm.
opposed to a fine dining. And I don't think it become a street food here in Singapore for the
Okay.
oyster product, where people are really happy paying for premium oysters
Yep.
if it's a really exclusive and a good product.
Is there what is the most popular seafood? Is it really crab? Like Singapore chili crab, or are there other things that are really
You are right though.
ah
It's still a crab,
got
but
it.
I can see like the oysters in one day it may take over the rest.
Yeah.
Cause if it's like a story come behind with the product, I think eventually like down the road in 5 years or 10 years it will be overtaking the crab.
Yeah. Oh, all
Yeah,
right. We're gonna
yeah.
revisit this
You
talk
you have to,
5 years.
and
Awesome. Well, I think we're basically out of time. I didn't see any particular questions, so I have my last one. So for
okay.
you, you can't say hama hama, but if you could visit anywhere else in the world to try their local oysters, where would you want to go?
I do actually I do have a plan though, like to make a trip down to New Zealand this
Oh,
March.
great.
Yeah, cause
Okay.
of the pandemic where I got to postpone my trip
Yeah.
to the next years. But yeah, other than Hamama Farm, like you ban me from not saying Hamama, but I really do want to back there to learn more about Hamama oysters. Cause I do feel there are so much things to learn. But
Yep.
other than the Hamama Farm, I would say New Zealand. Cause we do get some New Zealand oysters during the summertime in US.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Have you heard of the bluff oysters from New Zealand?
yeah.
Yep.
Even some of those the customer was saying like they are not from the New Zealand, but they were saying like you should get the bluff oysters from New Zealand.
Sure.
Where well, I never ever tasted them before, so I can't really tell you more about the bluff
Ve-
oysters.
Very
But yeah,
different. They're
very
very, very
different.
different.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're gosh, it's like comparing a white wine to a red wine. It's
Wow.
very different. There's so much more flavor, and it's not. I wouldn't call it clean whatsoever. It stays in your mouth. This
I
flavor,
see.
so you'll
Wow.
definitely have to try it one day.
We'll do, man. We'll do, man. Got to wait for the pandemics are
Yeah.
over, everything back to normal.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Polo.
Cool.
This has been really fun.
Yeah. Cool,
And
man.
hope, stay well. Say hi to everybody on your team for me.
You
All
too,
right.
Julie.
Have a good day.
Same to you. Good.
Bye.
Bye.
Awesome. So that was Chef Polo, who is the executive chef at Humpback, this fantastic seafood restaurant in Singapore. In case you didn't pick up on it, they have an assortment of hama hama oysters usually, but also will carry in some other types of products. I'm personally really psyched to try making a Singaporean chili crab sometime soon. So that is, on my to-do list. And 2 days from now, we will, no, not 2 days. This weekend, we're going to be talking to Eamon Clark, who is the head purchaser of oysters at Rodney's Oyster House in Toronto, Canada. So finally tackling the big oyster market just north of the US. Eamon is son of the famous Rodney Clark, who started Rodney's Oyster House, and basically a place where you have so many different oyster stories, so much oyster legacy, oyster shucking, everything about it. So I'm really excited to be talking to Eamon this weekend. So catch that in the schedule in either Facebook or YouTube. Please like, please share, and that's it. I'll talk to you soon.